Once you finish signing out your sign-out sheet, just pass it on down so we can collect them then.
Oh, I haven't filled out any of the other columns.
I forgot to pick up the thing.
I'm excited. This is like crazy.
And there's one that's like even more aggressive. Or like other side one that's like you're okay.
I had a sad moment. I was looking at the books to see who signed them out, and I'm the only one who keeps the book, and I couldn't remember the kids. I don't remember that.
Alison Christ had your book. She's like,
I don't know who
she's a descendant from.
That's what I was like. I was like, what a last name?
Jesus.
Oh.
All right, let's get a few things out of the way. It's a lengthy book. You'll be fine. There, we got it out of the way.
I have a spoiler.
So big.
Probably, yeah.
The shark he eats is the same one that eats his pleasure.
Okay.
Wise words.
There won't be a surprise for you when it happens.
Wait.
Your book, you got 581 pages, but you will be fine. For Monday the 13th, so not this Monday coming up, but the Monday after, I need you to be through chapter 9, which is page 195. You do need to read the prologue. Prologue starts on page 3. There's an introduction, which is like a foreword. I'm not worried about that. Certainly you can go ahead and read it. You're not being held accountable for it. The prologue is part of the book. It's part of the story. It's part of the narration. So it's not a separate...
Prologue.
Pardon?
That's implied with the word prologue.
Yes. And there's also then an epilogue. If you're going to have one, you may as well have the other. So the prologue and the epilogue are the bookends, and then you have the chapters in the middle. So you're reading the first 9 chapters. Technically, there's 10 sections for Monday the 13th, which from a content word count standpoint is pretty much right in line with what you did for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest when you read parts 1 and 2. So it's certainly not out of your reach by any means. This book we're breaking up into 3 sections, and all those dates are on your weekly syllabus that you got this week, and they'll be on next week's. So it's for the 13th, it's through page 195. I believe it's then for Tuesday the 21st that you would be through chapter 15, which is page 332, so roughly 140 pages. And then for March the 10th, I think it's the 10th, is when you are completely done with the book, page 581. So you have the book for like 5 weeks, and that last section is a lengthy section. It's about 250 pages. But you have the book for about 2 weeks, over 2 weeks to finish that off. So if and at this point you're disciplined enough, you know your time management, what it takes to devote to class A, B, C, and D. If you break those things down, you should be fine. If you wait until February the 10th to start reading, that might be a long weekend. And then you wait until like March the 9th to read the last 250 pages, that will be a long evening. So if you break it down, you should be perfectly fine. We'll do reading check quizzes for each one of those areas, and we're going to spend like about 2 days going over each section because there's going to be a lot of stuff to talk about when it comes to this book. You also picked up a motif chart when you came in. There's a lot of motifs in the book if you could not already figure it out. So it's the same list across the top of each page. I just have all the chapters there. I filled out the prologue for you to give examples of each of the motifs. I am not collecting the motif chart from you. I'm not doing a daily check-in or a chapter or a quarterly check-in. It's your motif chart to do with as you please. I highly recommend filling out the motif chart. I hope you realize at this point I try not to give you busy work and stuff just to, be bored with. This can pay dividends down the road for you. So I would highly suggest doing it. There's a lot of motifs. There's a lot of chapters. It's a good way to kind of keep things straight. Especially as you get later in the book and you need to reference the things earlier in the book. And we're going to have writing assignments, plural, that are going to be going on with this book. So it would be a valuable resource to take a look at.
You said last night that this reading assignment would be similar to
Yeah, well, in the sense that Mr. Hile goes, like, here's a book, you have a month read. So in that sense, yeah, that you have the amount. So yeah, I would think so. Robert.
So, am I to expect a sex scene in every chapter of this book?
You will in the first Prologue, sort of. I mean, I already filled it out. Chapter 1, yes. Chapter 2, yes. If you don't recognize what's
I
going
just
on
wanna
in
be
chapter
forewarned.
2, you need to reread because you really missed something. Chapter 3, yes. Chapter 4, subtle, but yes.
Why would you tell me? I like it.
So
They are not few and far between. No, it's not. In all seriousness, it's not like explicit graphic, that type of thing. However, it and this is somewhat pun intended. The first couple chapters, it is a punch to the gut. It is disturbing in some ways. Chapter 1 will make people uncomfortable, and not because of sex scene necessarily. Chapter 1. Not the prologue so much. Chapter 1 is going to make some people uncomfortable. Chapter 1 should make you uncomfortable. Chapter 2 is going to make you really uncomfortable. And if it doesn't, you miss something. And you need to kind of go back and figure out what it was because you missed something. Now, we are going to be going over the book, obviously. The motifs. It's not that every single motif shows up in every single chapter. So no, there is not going to be a sex scene in 27 reading sections, but a lot of those motifs show up in each chapter. So,
all right.
Confused where this was coming from.
So
like,
yes.
I thought the entire novel was about teacher.
now you see. But yeah, those motifs are going to be popping up all over the place. In Cuckoo's Nest, we talked about fog and laughter. We have like a few motifs. Size. Obviously, this one is
This
on
one needs a
steroids.
spreadsheet.
Yes.
This has a very good last line. I was into the last
Oh,
one.
for the yeah. And I mean, I obviously like the book. I teach the book. I can pick whatever book I want for the class. So there's always going to be some personal preference. My opinion, and again, it's opinion. I think Ellison is the best writer we read all year long. I think he is the most. I think by far he's the most talented writer without question. Now again, that doesn't mean he's going to be your favorite writer, but I think you read him, and I think you appreciate stuff that he does. He's really good with words. He does a lot of taboos, topics, issues to kind of throw people off. He does a lot of contrast. The book's Invisible Man. No, he is not invisible, but he is not visible in the way that he wants to be seen. And he plays with that a lot. And he does puns all over the place, but not in a goofy kind of way where you go, come on, but where you go, oh, I see that now. So I think he's pretty talented with what he does.
Go to page 19.
Yes. We're definitely doing a TWA, and make no bones about it, I'm not going to try to hide it from you at all. Next week, because we're not really talking about the book next week, unless someone has a question. Hey, I was reading this. Can you help me understand this part? Next week, we're going to be looking at more historical context, nonfiction sources, Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois. Those of you in APUSH, you're going to know what's going on. Obviously, those of you who are not in APUSH, it's fine, because I'll let you know what's going on, and we'll get some input from other people. But we'll be looking at issues that certainly surround the book. You're getting nonfiction documents. You will be getting a series of nonfiction documents, so you can tell what kind of writing assignment is going to be coming down the pike, within a few weeks. Synthesis, for those of you not getting the hints. So we will, which isn't anything to be scared of. But we're going to do a couple different things with it.
Says the teacher.
When does this take place?
I'm sorry?
The book. Invisible Man. When does it take place? Like,
The setting of it, the prologue, the opening and the closing is quote unquote present day. The book gets published in 1952, so like the majority of it is late 40s, early 1950s. Chapter 1, you're going to get a flashback to high school, and then it progresses its way back up to present day. So the narrator, we don't get a whole lot of information. He does not have a name. He's invisible. He's real, but he's not recognized. So you're getting about a late teen to early mid 30s, possibly early 40s, kind of timeline in a way. But 20s, 30s, 40s. We are in that cross section of U.S. history. Ellison's African American, you're dealing with African American issues, but you're also dealing with universal issues. I think it's short-sighted to go, it's a black book. It's not. It's an American novel. It transcends race. with some
Very
issues.
obviously brown.
But you're in that cross section
The book's
of
cover.
Civil War, Emancipation Proclamation, and Martin Luther King Jr.'s Civil Rights Movement has not happened yet. So you're kind of like in that dead period of the 100 years where King's really ticked off when we looked at I Have a Dream speech earlier in the year when he was repeating his 100 years, 100 years, 100 years. So we'll be looking at those movements, you know, to kind of take place in between them to try to gain some more equality, recognition, all that kind of stuff. Before we jump into the notes and stuff for it, your poetry quiz from yesterday, Maggie, next week's poem is over there, which you can grab. And Maggie has to make it up, so you're not getting yours back yet till she makes it up. She'll be making up tomorrow in class at the latest. And then your O'Connor essay due for next Friday. One thing I would suggest, because your O'Connor essay for next Friday, that rhetorical analysis, don't forget about your class calendar, and you got the tiny URL address on all your weekly syllabi. We got YouTube notes for Monday, Tuesday, and yesterday. So if you start working on an essay while we're talking about W.E.B. Du Bois on Wednesday the 8th, you might not be remembering some things we talked about on Monday the 30th. Go back, find them. I think it would be pretty good. So I got a thank you very much for my TPCast video that I did like 12 years ago. Got a new notification today. Made me feel good.
What they use it for?
I don't know. Yeah, something with TPCast with poetry. Meredith?
Yesterday, did you actually go into depth about the essay?
We, what we did yesterday, and again, I think it'd be worthwhile to check it out. We did a soapstone, kind of like just setting the stage, what O'Connor's looking at. With you folks, we were able to jump into rhetorical devices. I wasn't able to do that with all the classes, but a good list of possible devices are on there. We didn't really do anything more specific than that because you're picking the argument, you're picking the story, you're picking the devices. So your essay could be very different from Hannah's essay. But that would certainly be some stuff to kind of start to consider. Between now and O'Connor, it's basic, and the essay due for next Friday is basically you reading parts of Invisible Man and kind of working with the essay at the same time. The normal type of stuff that we do.
Do you record every period or just like first period?
I'm recording you right now.
Oh, did they get that other thing? The thing from
Usually
earlier?
I record fifth period because by then I kind of know what I'm talking about. First period's rough. Those kids are at a disadvantage. I don't do bad for them.
No, seriously, did they get the first thing?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's what he
Okay.
Right now.
Yeah, that's why I don't. Yeah. Usually I record fifth, and then if I have technical issues, Sam, I still got you guys as backup. I just forgot to record fifth, so. Hold on.
Brief reminder, we're back.
That happens every day, Elena, so like get used to it.
And sometimes I'll just take stuff from last year if I was really having a good day, like save this video for then.
Are you ever like, you have like a video where you're like, man, this is like the apex of my career. This is like, I get a great.
Yeah. When we did the rhetorical, remember the Coca-Cola letter? Like, yeah, that was like my day. It's all downhill after that. Took me 14 years to get there, and it's going to be a slow descent.
It's like Shia LaBeouf.
So I like ruined this recording. Or...
Did I say that out loud?
Imagine like Mr. Kane on the live stream just screaming.
The best subplans, Megan, I ever left was for this book. We were like halfway through, had an emergency, I had to be out for like a couple days. Printed out the lyrics to the song, and they had to do an analytical essay about how the book matches up with the song. I just picked the song for the heck of it. I didn't really have any reasons, but they were figuring out literary merit to it, so
Just
pretty
stalled
good.
for a couple of days.
I did.
Yes.
Sam, I see your hand up, but I want to go over something real quick first. The at the end, you were getting. Oops, I passed it. There it is. That picture, which, based on the light shadows kind of coming in, it can be kind of hard to see. Can we zoom in a little bit more? There we go, a little bit. What do you see, or what do you think you see?
Are those light bulbs?
Those are light bulbs.
That's a man.
That is a man.
What's he doing?
That is the narrator. There's not a film version of the book or anything like that.
That would be very hard.
There you go, 1,369. Motif chart. There's not a film version, but Jeffrey Wall is a well-known American photographer who did a series of photographs where he took scenes from well-known books and kind of staged them and did a series of them. And so this is the photograph that he does from Invisible Man. This is the prologue. This is how the book opens. So the book is going to open with him in his home, although he kind of refers to it as his hole. It's an abandoned basement of an apartment building. Nobody knows that he's there, and he's accumulating his light bulbs, all 1,369 of them, and he's trying to get more and more and more and more. In the book, he describes them being on all the time, where in here you don't see that. That's probably more for a photographic, purpose that you want to get the right shade, lighting, and all that kind of stuff. But
Because if you had 1,369 light bulbs and tried to take a picture, things probably wouldn't go too
would
well.
not turn out so well. But like in the prologue, he's going to talk about he wants all the ceiling covered, the walls, he even wants them to go onto the floor, where he will be immersed in light all the time. That he is.
Jeepers.
There's a bed that's
How would-
levitating in the middle of the room.
No, I meant like with all the lights.
Yeah.
How has no one
He
noticed?
sleeps with his eyes open too.
Oh, that's weird.
Get us.
I just threw that
Don't
part in.
electrical
That's
bills
not.
exist?
Well, and that's one thing that he'll even talk about it, where the electric company knows that their light is being, the electricity, the power is being used, but they can't figure out where it's at. So it's part of his
It's
little
over
deception
1,000
thing.
light bulbs in one centralized location. I think someone would notice this.
You would think, Sam.
Okay, 2 questions. So it mentioned 2 different places, Harlem, New York City, and then the deep rural South. Which place does it take place in?
Yes,
Is it like the flashback is in one place and the other part?
pretty much. The present day is going to be in Harlem, in New York City. So the apartment is New York City. Ellison is from the South. You don't really think of Oklahoma as being the South, but it's still kind of considered part of the South with the region, especially with cultural viewpoints and things like that of the era. Ellison, and not saying the book is meant to be completely autobiographical, but certainly you're right about what you know, and your own experiences are going to come in. I mean, you think about any book we've looked at, they all deal with the writer's experiences to some level, and this one's going to be no different. Ellison is born in the South. We'll go over some of his personal biography here, but he then ends up moving to New York City, to Harlem in the 30s when he is 23 years old in 1936. And the narrator kind of takes a similar path, born in the South, from the South. The locations are very, I mean, he's in Harlem, but the locations for the most part in the South are very nondescript, very general. But there are a ton of allusions throughout the course of the book. And I don't mean that in the religious sense, but where you can kind of start to pinpoint where things are taking place. And I'll get into that as we go. But the book opens in the North, but the tale, the flashback starts in the South and will progress south. By the end of chapter 9, he is back. He's in New York City. Not back, but he has arrived in New York City.
And then my second question is, in one of the quotes it says something about like by the power of Dante or something. Is
The
that a
depths of Dante.
reference- The depths of Dante. Is that a reference to Dante's Inferno?
Yes. And so
It's a Dante Powell.
Over there is get you. Like, catch me outside. How about that?
some people
Is there
are,
like a
are
Dante
more
and
well
Harry
known.
Potter that we don't know about?
Probably.
It could be.
This was written before.
And it'll make more sense as you kind of go along, but he is essentially, and literally and figuratively, he's living underground. And so that's where he's descending into the depths, with Dante going into hell, into the Inferno. Not that he thinks he lives in hell, so to speak, but he is way beneath, down below what everyone else would be.
Probably is very hot with 1,369
I would
light
think
bulbs
so.
in the room.
But a lot of his allusions tend to be historical and literary, and so that would certainly be one of them. And with the literary allusions, he's named after Ralph Waldo Emerson, who we did not read, but we talked about Emerson with Thoreau. Emerson is kind of like the influence for Thoreau. Thoreau tutors his children, lives on his property when he makes the little cabin outside for civil disobedience. Ellison's father names him after Ralph Waldo Emerson, who is his favorite writer, poet, and he kind of hopes that Ellison grows up to be a poet, which he isn't too far removed from it. But there is, of course, going to be a character in the book called Emerson. And Emerson teaches, or not teaches, but a lot of Emerson's points are about self-reliance, teaching self-reliance, and so those ideas kind of start to come in through the book. A lot of name kind of symbolism and a lot of puns taking place with the names, except for the narrator, who does not have a name.
Can we name him to have that name?
I'll tell you his name later when we get to him.
Wait, so we do find out his name?
Sort of. It's a paradox. Ellison's father, who is working on a construction site for their small business, dies when Ellison's only 3 years old. It's a freak accident. There's a machine called a hopper, kind of as a funnel that you kind of load stuff into, and it chops it, puts it into a conveyor belt. They're lowering a 100-pound ice cube, block of ice, into the hopper, and it falls off the crane, bounces, splits apart. Shards of the cube, like, literally impales his father, who dies of internal injuries later on.
Wow.
It's gruesome.
That's a twist.
Ellison's only 3, and he has a younger brother who's only 1, and so it's the two of them and their mother Ida, who the book is dedicated to. The family moves to Gary, Indiana, where they have relatives. To think maybe get a fresh start doesn't work, and so they end up coming back to Oklahoma City. Mom works as a domestic servant, so maid, nanny, caretaker, for families in the area. Saying she's involved with radical political movement probably makes it sound more serious than it truly is. She's not, trying to overthrow the government. This isn't Winston and Julia taking on the party and all that kind of stuff. Although there is a brotherhood in both books. Crazy. But communism, socialism, one of the groups that communist socialists in the U.S. are really trying to target are African Americans, because you have a disenfranchised group that's looking for equality, and that's a segment of the population that they go after. So Mom does get involved with some communist meetings and things like that, but again, it's not that she's public enemy #1 of U.S. government or anything like that. Tuskegee Institute, sounds like Apish, we're about there.
Just
Past it, yeah.
Okay. Tuskegee Institute is one of the preeminent all-black schools in the South. Ellison applies in 1931, gets denied, applies in 1932, gets denied, applies in 1933, and is accepted. He does not have a whole lot of money, so getting tuition costs does take some time. His most prized possession as a child that he's able to purchase with his own money is a trumpet because he wants to become a jazz musician. And what do you know? They have a trumpet opening in the band, and that's one of the things that kind of helps him kind of get into the school. So he's there to study music. He leaves in 1936, and some people think that's where he gets the 1,369 light bulbs from, switches the numbers around from when he went to Harlem. Don't know if that's the case or not, but sounds nice. But he leaves the Institute after 3 years. Financial difficulties would be part of it. And then also, he's a little surprised by still how there's some social stratification taking place where maybe not everyone is accepted in the way that they kind of thought they would be. And he's a little bit on the outside looking in. So New York City kind of gives him a new opportunity. The narrator of the book graduates from high school, goes to a preeminent all-black school in the South. It never says Tuskegee Institute, but it certainly seems that that's probably the place that they're looking at, and we'll take a look at some of those details coming forward. And again, that's where those allusions would come from. Booker T. Washington, for those of you unaware, is the founder of Tuskegee Institute, really looking at trying to get industrial economic growth for African Americans following World War II, post-Civil War era, to try to gain some recognition. And Washington and Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois, another historical figure, they play some pretty significant roles kind of in the book, in the ideology and the way that it is presented. So, but goes to New York City. Harlem Renaissance is underway. It's like an explosion of African American culture, music, literature, all that stuff. And he gets two really good friends right off the bat. He becomes well acquainted, very good friends with Richard Wright, who is the preeminent black author of the era, and then also Langston Hughes, right there, who you've probably read some of his poetry, I would think, like 8th, 9th grade anthologies. I Too Sing America is a famous poem of his, and there are some others, which we'll take a look at. But they encourage Ellison to pursue a career in writing, which he starts to do with some critical reviews and political ideas and viewpoints and things like that. And by 1937, he's publishing his first short story, and then he has a whole bunch of reviews and other pieces that follow in the subsequent years. Wright and Hughes also kind of dabble with Communist Party for a little bit as well, and so Ellison also does get some of those influences. Mentioned the Brotherhood. There is a Brotherhood that exists within this book, separate from 1984, although published close to the same time. But the Brotherhood kind of has that communist characteristics to it throughout the course of the book. That's not going to be until the latter half or so of the text. Not something you're going to be coming up with during the first 9 chapters. I'm going to skip through this pretty quickly because I've already said most of it, so don't worry about writing this stuff down. But first short story, 1937, and then again, a lot of his works tend to be more reviews, critical arguments, social equality, justice. Those are certainly things that he's taking a look at, and certainly are going to be themes within the course of the book itself as well. And what just happened? There we go. In 1946, this is when he gets married to Fanny McConnell. It's actually his second marriage, but he remains married to her for the rest of his life until he dies in 1994. But in 1946 is when he starts publishing Invisible Man, ultimately gets published in 1952. And this is where I think sometimes the book kind of gets misidentified as, it has to be a quote-unquote like black literature. It's certainly looking at man's place, identity within society. It's allegorical in nature, and certainly there are some biographical details, but that place and identity would transcend, simply race. So it doesn't need to solely speak to African Americans or cannot speak to whites. There are some criticism from other black writers that the book is not quote-unquote black enough, in the sense that it is not demanding enough of change or reform or angry, where Richard Wright, again, a close acquaintance friend of his books do tend to be a little bit more forceful in nature, and Ellison's not necessarily doing that. But you're taking a look at that northern and southern racism and alienation that can exist in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s. So again, Sam reference to both of those things that would be happening. Immediate success, 1953 Book of the Year Award, 1965, recognized as most important book since World War II in roughly those 20 years by quite a few folks. And it shoots him up to like literary stardom very shortly after it does get published. Going rapid fire here. After Invisible Man, I wouldn't worry about writing this stuff. Mentioned to you, major icon, literary icon. He spends a fair amount of time in Europe during the 1950s because you're dealing with McCarthyism, Red Scare. You have a minority writer, which is kind of going to put him behind the 8 ball already, still at this point in the 1950s. He has dabbled with communism. He is well acquainted with those who have dabbled with communism, and his book certainly, while not communist propaganda by any means, does have some viewpoints that people could certainly misconstrue. So he kind of makes McCarthy's "we're not so sure of you" list. He's in Great Britain, France, doing speaking tours, things like that. Comes back to the U.S. in 1958. At this point, McCarthyism has died down, and then he accepts a teaching position at Bard College in New York, and then also teaches literature at Yale and Rutgers. So theoretically, you could go to Yale or Harvard in Massachusetts and read Invisible Man and have it taught to you by Ralph Ellison, and then you could go, I think the writer means to do this, and then he could go, no, you're wrong. F on your paper. Kind of hard to argue.
Fair enough.
I don't have any books. Can't do that yet. Someday. I'm gonna do a book of poetry, I think.
I would buy it.
There you go. All it takes is one. He is working on a second book, Juneteenth, which is reference to Emancipation Proclamation. It's kind of like an informal holiday name that is used in the South for when the Emancipation Proclamation takes place by blacks. Whites certainly aren't looking at it as a holiday in the late 1800s. But it's a book that he works on for many, many years, over 40 years. 300 pages of his manuscripts and edits and changes and all those things get lost. Keep in mind, this is before like computer and all that stuff. It's typewriter, it's gone, it's not coming back. During his lifetime, he has over 2,000 pages dedicated to the book. Not that it's 2,000 pages long, but just dedicated with revisions, and he never publishes it during his lifetime. It does get published in 1999, 5 years after he dies, and it's 368 pages long, so it's still a lengthy book, but again, not meant to be page 1 to 2,000, but they kind of took what they figured was probably what he wanted to do. He is a perfectionist when it comes to the craft. So, you know, when it comes with this book, do you think he meant to? Yes, I'm pretty sure he did when it comes to, you know, parallels, allusions, literary references, you know, like Dante and all that kind of stuff. He's pretty particular about what it is that he's doing. But educator, writer, sculptor, photographer, musician, pretty healthy life for those 81 years. The last slide, well, 2 slides, excuse me, that we're going to take a look at. I mentioned to you, chapter 1 is a little bit of a punch to a gut. It's kind of referred to as the Battle Royal or Battle Royale scene. It's originally a short story. A Battle Royale is a fight where you have 3 or more people and last man standing wins. That's basically what's going to be going on in chapter 1. So it's pretty ruthless. But that is a short story that he ends up pretty much building the rest of the book around. And so within that chapter and the book as a whole, you're looking at several social intellectual issues, and the allusions start coming pretty hard and heavy at the end of that chapter, where if you don't recognize a major allusion at the end of chapter 1, you're missing something, or you're in a coma, which I hope you're not when that time comes. If it's a literary device, the man uses it in the book, especially in the first half. The first half tends to be a little bit more figurative and symbolic. The second half is going to be a little bit more realistic in depiction, but there's going to be a ton of imagery, a lot of allusions, extended metaphors, things like that. The use of the words white and black, flashbacks are going to be taking place. Mentioned to you, motifs all over the place. So kind of keep an eye out for those types of things. But Monday the 13th is when you need to be done with prologue and chapters 1 through 9. So I think it's page 195. Tomorrow we'll watch Disney movies.
Really?
Movie part of it.
Oh, Song of the South.
What?
Song of the South.
Never heard that movie. I actually really hate that movie.
First movie with live action and animation all in the same scene.
Now it's gonna be crap.
It's like if
Sorry, have you ever the same scene?
Pardon?
Wait, you say the same scene?
Yeah, so you have live action and animation like happening concurrent.
Like